my point is, though, still the biggest group of people are considered independents. Well, the biggest group of people are people who don't vote, right? And that was Bernie's strategy to try to energize those people. And that didn't materialize. And then the next biggest group of people are people who aren't affiliated with a party. That's the next biggest group. So Main Street USA says, never Biden, Dem exit 2020. Americans deserve better. Close to 40% consistently identify as independent for party affiliation. We need a third party to break the two-party oligarchy control, says a Gallup poll. So now I'm going to call Nick Brana, and we're going to talk to him about this. Friend of the show, Nick Brana is the founder and national director of the Movement for a People's Party and the former national political outreach coordinator on Bernie's 2016 presidential campaign. He's here to talk to us about Bernie, his campaign suspension. Hi to Nick. How are you, buddy?
Hey, Jimmy, what a day.
So go ahead. Why do you think it happened, and why do you think it happened right now, and why do you think it happened like this?
Yeah, I think that Bernie's been pushing for essentially, changes in further coronavirus bills. He's been pushing for changes inside the Democratic Party. He's been trying to get progressive legislation like on the radar, and he just gave up his biggest platform. And frankly, I don't understand why he did it. I think it was a big mistake. I think that he should have stayed in as long as he could. That would have been the way to pressure Biden, even if he wanted to do that. Though obviously, what we need in this moment is we have got to end the Democratic Party. Yes. We have got to leave the Democratic Party. It is just so abundantly clear at this point. 2 rigged elections in a row. In 2018, only 2 progressives unseated establishment members of Congress because of party rigging again in the primaries. And so this has got to be the end. It's got to be the last straw.
Yeah, no kidding.
So let me just read you David Sirota's tweet. He said, one thing I'll add, I think almost everyone has it wrong about why we weren't more successful. I haven't seen a single take, left, right, or center, that's gotten it right. Most of the pundits' takes are ridiculously and completely divorced from all basic facts of what happened. Well, I just laid out why I think what happened. They never, Bernie's overarching goal of not being Ralph Nader was the thing that informed the entire campaign. He brought in people like Foz and guys like Michael Duss, right from the Center for American Progress, and put him in the middle of his campaign. And half the people in there were just straight out, incompetence. What do you think happened?
And you make a great point, because now we have a nominee inside the Democratic Party that has literally been like a lifelong right-winger on the wrong side of every single progressive issue, segregation for Christ's sake. A guy who is now in the middle of a sexual assault scandal for rape. I have never heard of a candidate dropping out when their opponent is actually in the middle of a sexual assault scandal. And so I can't understand what Bernie is doing with this and how this gives him more leverage. I think he had a big platform as long as he was in the race, and I think he should have kept it as long as possible. I also don't understand why he put some of these individuals in his campaign. As you've said before, I think that Bernie's obviously a very conflicted person, and I saw this when I was at Our Revolution, when I was the electoral manager there, and Bernie was conflicted even about starting to take big money. And so it's clear that, Jimmy, I think you have it right when you talk about the theory of change and how we actually pressure politicians and how we actually push as the left. Just kind of saying that we're going to fall in line with any politician or we're going to compliment any politician because that's our team, Bernie, that doesn't do it. Bernie has enormous pressure coming from the establishment. And what we have to do is we have to be critical of our leaders. We have to be offering that counterbalance on the left as well. In the 30s, FDR faced enormous criticism from the left. Well, he implemented the Green New Deal in order to prevent the collapse of capitalism, and he was actually very explicit about that. And so we need to do the same. And most importantly, we have to put an end to these 2 corporate parties. If you haven't seen enough now, I don't know what could possibly be enough. But the last 5 years of progressive strategy have been Bernie's campaigns, from one campaign to the next, trying to reform the Democratic Party. And we now have a verdict on that strategy, and it's failed. So we've got to move on. we have to say at this point that our allegiance is to the working people of this country who are struggling now during this pandemic more than ever before. Than it is to those people above than it is to this party.
What do you think about the value of having the squad and people like that run inside the Democratic Party right now? It's of some value, but it doesn't seem to be much because they all just rolled over for the worst thing in the world, and so they kind of just negated the whole point for them being there, right? Like, there's no case that they can make for themselves after that, can they?
Like, there's a complete misunderstanding, I think, of how the Democratic Party works systemically, and so this is not a question of, like, the left has been operating under this theory that if we just find politicians who are, have enough integrity and have enough heart, and we put them into the Democratic Party, like, those people are then going to take the Democratic Party and they're going to change it. They're going to reform it. That's not how it works. The Democratic Party is a machine with a direction of its own. Anybody who goes in there, AOC has even talked about this. She's even talked about it openly. You see it in the transition from the video you played about Bernie when he was saying, look, it's a case closed. We need it has to happen within a third party in the United States. You saw that to where he is now. And so it's not about just getting the right people. We can maybe elect a trickle here and there, which is what we've done in the Democratic Party over the last 4 or 5 years. But at the end, those people enter an assembly line where they are being actively reeled into the party, because the minute they get there, they have to suck up to neoliberal committee heads. They have to befriend the head of the different chambers. They have to work with the DCCC, the SEC, to make sure that they don't get primaried. They have to support. There's enormous pressure to support centrist Democrats who are running in swing districts. And so there's a trajectory that you get to when you get inside the Democratic Party, and it is always reeling you further into the establishment. And so we need a party now that is fighting alongside our movements for justice instead of against them. And
so you started Draft Bernie because you saw that dead end that was the progressive path inside to the Democratic Party. As Shama Sawant says, the road for progressives inside the Democratic Party leads to a graveyard. And they love, there's nothing that the establishment loves more than to have someone like Bernie running as a Democrat. So then all that energy that's anti-establishment gets funneled back into the establishment, and then it just fizzles. Would that be a correct assessment?
It's absolutely true. And what we've seen in the Democratic Party after these last 4 years since Bernie ran and really galvanized a new wave of the progressive movement is that the cycle continues. For the longest time, the cycle has been, for at least the past 40, 50 years, it's been a Republican comes in, they lurch us to the right on tax policy, on other things, they sharply increase inequality, and then Democrat comes in afterwards, administration, and sometimes they have full control. They've had full control of government, like Obama did. They can do anything they want. But what they do then is they don't take the country to the left. They don't reduce inequality. They don't reduce the cost of health care. They don't reduce student loans. Instead, they don't do anything meaningful about the climate crisis. Instead, they normalize everything that the Republicans did, and they build on it instead.
So when you say,
and so that creates this effect where we're going to the right consistently, and this is just the most horrific and egregious example of that. Joe Biden is a man who Barack Obama picked. Barack Obama, new kid on the block to Wall Street, a little unsafe. He picks Joe Biden to signal to Wall Street, I'm on your team, And so that man is now the Democratic Party's nominee, a man who's been reduced essentially to the mental state of an infant.
When you say that Barack Obama normalized all the horrible stuff that Republicans did, what you mean by that, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that instead of unwinding the banks and breaking them up, he made them bigger. So now it wasn't George Bush doing that, it was Barack Obama doing it, so everyone went along with it. He took George Bush's tax cuts, which were controversial, and Barack Obama made them permanent. They had a sunset clause in them. Why? Because they weren't popular, right, with regular people, and they had to put a sunset clause in there, and Barack Obama could have just let it sunset, and he didn't. Right. So that's another thing. He also took us from 2 wars to 7. So now war became normalized. Both parties, so 100% pro-war. He opened the Arctic to drilling whenever Shell Oil asked. He kicked 5.1 million people out of their house during a recession, which is like if he was president, he would start doing that right now too. So that's what you're talking about. All that he built the cages. He exported 3 million Hispanics. I mean, he made all this stuff normal. That's the stuff you're talking about. And so he never came in and said, hey, we have to have rent relief, mortgage relief. We have to write down the value of these mortgages and help these people stay in their house. The template was never set on how to handle this, and that's why we got Donald Trump, which was the key critique that Bernie Sanders was unwilling to make, and that's why he never once critiqued Joe Biden's time at the White House. Correct?
That's right, because he was unwilling to criticize Barack Obama. And in the end, he needed to run against Barack Obama in 26 and the legacy of Obama and the Democrats as a whole. And so now we have this phenomenon where Biden has literally made it through the campaign without like any negative ads being aired against him. It's insane. But in 2016, Bernie's coalition changed from 2016 to 2020. He didn't bring out the same level of young voters. He didn't bring out the same level of rural voters. And that, I think, is because he started playing ball with the establishment at the same time that he was supporting, that he was working with the grassroots. So he was operating in this awkward middle ground where what people want to hear is they want to unequivocally hear people that are saying, like, look, for the last several decades, my wages have stagnated, but the cost of my health care, the cost of my education, the cost of housing has exploded. I cannot afford this anymore. He was attacking both establishment parties in 2016 very sharply. And then, the language of oligarchy, political revolution, that fell off Bernie's campaign in 2020. It didn't have the edge that it did in 2016. And I think that's a big reason that he lost those individuals.
Yes, that's exactly. I heard Glenn Greenwald made a similar point that Bernie sounded like a regular Democrat, especially when he would say Trump was the beginning and the end of all our problems, that he was the most corrupt president in history, which just is manifestly not true. That's just crazy. It's like, why are you doing that? Why do you go along with that? Why don't you focus on the reason why we got this guy if he's so horrible? And, he's a pathological liar. Who isn't in Washington? It's like you're not winning anybody over by sounding just like Kamala Harris. You're not winning anyone over by doing that, but that's what he kept doing. And, I remember when Barack Obama went to Flint, Michigan and had a sip of water and left town and fucked those people over. I mean, who's a bigger liar than that? Nobody. So, his entire cabinet came from Citigroup. I mean, come on. So now how do we go forward, Nick? Now you have this movement for a People's Party, and so we can organize now. And it doesn't even look like we're going to have a real convention this year where people get to go to it, because I just read an article in South Korea, 50 cases confirmed of people who had the coronavirus, got better, and then got sick with it again. So there's no immunity. It seems like the immunity that comes from this is very weak. So we're not going to be able to go out in the public again until there's a vaccine, which won't be until 2021, the end of summer at the earliest. And so we're not going to be able to get together. And how are we going to be able to organize and start this movement, or get this movement? And it's already been started, but get it into gear.
That's right. Yeah. No, I completely agree, Bernie. Jimmy, I think that they're going to wish you were in his position right now, making those decisions. I think that they're going to cancel the conventions. They're going to the physical ones. They're basically going to take them digital. And one of the reasons is coronavirus. The other is that, hey, it's all wrapped up, right?
Yeah.
Why have the show? Why give progressives some kind of like platform to fight? And also, why give them like a place to congregate? There were many different movements that sprung up when it looked like when it looked like it might be a contested convention, and there were literally thousands of people signing up in a matter of weeks to go and basically shut down the Democratic National Convention. And so, hey, convenient to get out of that. And so I think what we've got to do now is we have got to tell the rest of the progressive movement, and particularly those who are in positions of influence, those who are in positions of leadership, This is when we need you to show your leadership. We need you to side with a major new party. We need you to say that this is it's time. When you look abroad, Jimmy, and there's so little actually like knowledge of what's happening abroad in party systems. You look at Mexico, you look at Spain, you look at Chile, you look at France, you look at Germany, you look at Italy. And like what's actually succeeding is where the left is building new parties. That's where they're succeeding, where they're trying to reform establishment parties into newly progressive parties. That's where they're failing. And so like we have got to learn from that. We've got to learn from what's been done in our own history, where the abolitionist Republican Party replaced the Whig Party, and it took only 4 years. Morena in Mexico replaced the 2-3 establishment parties that had been in power in Mexico for the past century.
Yeah, 100
years. And they replaced them within 4 years. And it began as a movement. And that's what the movement for a People's Party is now. It's to build that. And so that's what we've got to do right now. So please, I'm urging everyone, like, this is when we need to take a stand. Go to peoplesparty.org, sign up to volunteer, sign up to get our updates, and get involved.
So there's that. And so that's good. I encourage everyone to do that. I think it's important. It's one of the ways we can fight back. And another way is that people need to organize as far as payment strikes. Like the only thing that's going to work is a rent strike, mortgage strike, credit card strike, student loan strike. And so someone needs to organize that. Now, the rent strikes and stuff, that's happening locally already up in the Bay Area. I know, and then other places, and of course in New York, there's people are trying to start to do that now. May 1st is rent day, so nobody's going to have any money come May 1st, right? Because that $1,200 ain't getting anybody. And by the way, did you know that $1,200 that everybody said they had to? That's why the progressives had to vote for the screwing of America for a generation for $1,200, and Thomas Massey says that was the cheese in the trap. And what happens when you take the cheese? The trap smashes your head in, right? That's what's coming now for America. But even worse is that cheese isn't even the cheese that they're giving you, because that $1,200 is not a $1,200 gift or a grant to you. It's coming out of your refund check from the IRS. So the cheese in the trap, you actually paid for it too. That's actually your cheese. They just put it in there. That's how bad this is, and people don't realize that. And I think once they do, it's going to be much easier to coordinate and organize rent strikes, credit card strikes, student loan strikes, and a third party. Because nobody's going to be organizing around Joe Biden. Go ahead.
This is possibly the biggest transfer of wealth since the Great Depression, certainly since the Great Recession.
In human history. I think I've heard it said in human history.
But maybe. And it is just appalling. It is just appalling that such a thing would pass with unanimity in the Senate. And when you add up the numbers of the trillions of dollars that have been put into Wall Street in terms of quantitative easing from the Fed and from the stimulus package, you arrive at a single-digit percent. It's about 6% that is actually going to people. And guess what? That money is quickly funneled back up to the banks.
Right back.
It's funneled back up, right back up to the exactly. To pay your rent,
yes.
To pay your mortgage,
yes.
to pay whatever debts you have. And it's like that sucks up $1,200. So even that $1,200 is basically like minimum survival level, up to what's happening now, Jimmy, is it's one of the most despicable things I've ever seen, honestly.
Ever.
There is an entire class of society right now that has been designated expendable, and that is being like an amputation that is being cut off and sacrificed. An entire class, millions of people. They don't have any income anymore. They were living paycheck to paycheck before this. They have zero savings, and now they're expected to continue paying for rent and basic necessities. It's abominable.
So I'm sure you're aware of what's happening in Sicily. Already happened a week ago. Is that people ran out of money and they still were hungry, so they went to the store, grocery store, filled their carts, and they just walked out with them saying, "We don't have any money." And so the government's response wasn't to make sure people had food or money to buy it. They sent the military to the supermarkets. That's what's going to happen here, by the way. That's what they'll do. They'll call the cops first before they call out somebody to give you money or give you food. That's what's going to happen here. So it's going to get mad.
You know what else?
Go ahead.
You know what else they're going to do? They'll put the damn National Guard in if we had, for example, strikes of essential workers. Like they'll have the National Guard come in and like replace them at supermarkets. They would do that before they gave them, I think, the benefits. You know. And clearly, I think we should push for a rent strike. Absolutely, May 1st, May Day. You know, that's coming up. Tens of millions potentially not going to be able to afford rent at that point. And I think we also, as you've said before, we need to push for essential workers going on strike and a general strike on May 1st.
So people say, I had a union leader on the show. And I said, I brought this up about strikes and what kind of leverage do we have? That's the only leverage that workers have is the threat of strike. That's it. And he said, well, we should try to get them some bad press. That's what we should try to do. And and he said, well, I don't think we should be striking now when people need essential goods. And I'm like, of course, that's when you should be. So what do you say to someone who says this is the worst time to be doing? This is the time you should be doing a strike because you bring the system to its knees immediately, and they have to react. You can't. Hey, let's make sure we do our protest when it doesn't inconvenience anyone, and maybe we could just do it in our apartment. I mean, that's the sentiment that's in America right now today. What do you say to that?
And I say that these workers are being made to work like, you know. I watched your interview with the Amazon
Christian
Smalls.
Yeah, it's like, you know, you listen to the stories like that and about the conditions that these workers are forced. You know, people are forced to work in at this time. You know, go to work. Oh, no paid sick leave. Go to work. Infect everybody else. Infect customers. You know, the conditions are horrific. They should strike just for the conditions. So that's my view. It needs to come from the labor movement itself, and it needs to come from workers. And I don't know if the unions themselves are going to do it. And so, like, that's why you've seen the wildcat strikes, you know, is that the workers organizing themselves around the unions even.
So it doesn't seem like it's going to come from union leadership because, as you and I both know, the problem with unions is that they get co-opted by the people they're supposed to be organizing against, right? And so they become part of management almost, or an extension of it, right? And so that's why I don't think we're seeing anything happen. I mean, look at Randy, just sort of, for instance, the teachers union. Now, every teacher I've ever met is a supporter of Bernie Sanders. They 2 times in a row, they endorsed the wrong person. They endorsed Joe Biden this time, right? Was it Elizabeth? She didn't either way. And she doesn't poll the teachers. She doesn't poll the members. So there's a corrupt union leader right there. There's the head of the teachers union. She's corrupt. So, and I'm sure that goes for, so talk about, maybe, do you know more about how this happened when FDR was president? Because there was a ton of wildcat strikes happening at the time all over the place. And it was, so tell me, what do you think the conditions would need to be? And do you think it is a possibility that we could have a strike like this?
There was also a socialist party, Norman Thomas, that was pressuring, that was actively speaking, you know, against about how FDR wasn't going far enough. There was a massive amount of mobilization, the biggest I think the country's ever seen at the time in terms of organized labor. That's when organized labor won its biggest policy victories, which, you know, have been undermined and dismantled ever since then. And so I think this is it's kind of a different, it's a unique time because people cannot get in the streets. And if people could get in the streets, things would be different. But I think right now what we have to do is we have to build as big a consensus as possible that we have got to produce this change around a new party and around these strikes, because we can pull off the strikes. That is what happened in the 30s, is that there was and it was done around the unions. Also, it was also done around the unions in the 30s. And so clearly there's a model there about, we know when an institution isn't in power for too long, there's an incentive. This applies to the unions. It applies to the NGOs. It applies to the progressive politicians. There's an incentive where they get pulled into the establishment, essentially. They have these connections that they're trying to maintain. And so it has to happen through new people coming about and organizing, like Justin.
Hey, this is the part where I tell you where our live shows are, but there aren't any. And then I would tell you to go join our premium, but nobody has a fucking job. So why don't you just enjoy the video?